This climbing footage messed me up so bad, and it only got worse when I learned the full story behind it.
Hello! Really praying and hoping someone would come and rescue me.
That footage was recorded in April of 2023, somewhere around 19,000 feet in elevation on Mount Annapurna, which is the most dangerous peak on Earth, statistically speaking. The man you hear in the video is 34-year-old Anurag Maloo, and he's trapped at the bottom of a deep glacier. He knows his only chance at survival is if someone rescues him, but what he doesn't know is that the men he was climbing with just left him for dead. And so with no other option but to just wait, Anurag pressed record on his GoPro. He was alive and he was conscious, at least for the time being, and so he would continue recording messages for his family, for his own sanity, and for whoever eventually would recover his body. But after some time, his GoPro died, and essentially Anurag did too. But what happened next is almost too unbelievable to be true, and I have even more footage to prove that it's all real. Anurag Maloo is a name that most of you probably haven't heard before, but I promise you that by the end of this video, you are going to remember his name for a very, very long time. And speaking of a long time, I've been making these videos for a long time, and I would love to hit 1 million subscribers this year in 2026. And so if you would click subscribe as we get into this truly wild story, it would mean the world. And if you're already subscribed, I appreciate you guys so much. So Anurag Maloo was born on June 13th, 1989 in Kashangar, Rajasthan, India. And just a side note, I'm gonna do my best with these pronunciations. I really apologize if I mess them up. Now, this was a small city, and his family was quite traditional. No one in his family had ever climbed mountains before. No one had even traveled the world. And so for Anurag, going to college and getting a degree in engineering would have been more than enough, right? And he did do that, but instead of taking some corporate job, he joined Teach for India, a nonprofit that sends young professionals to teach in low-income schools across the country. Anurag wanted to make a difference, and while teaching, he realized that the kids he was teaching, who were mostly from disadvantaged backgrounds, we'll say, well, he realized that they needed a lot more than just textbooks. They needed to see what was possible, what you could achieve. They needed someone to show them that the world was bigger than the circumstances they were trapped in. And so Anurag started dreaming big, like really big. In 2011, he participated in the Jagriti Yatra, which was a 15-day train journey across India designed to inspire young entrepreneurs. He met change makers, social innovators, people who were trying to solve like real problems, you know what I mean? And in 2013, Anurag got invited on an expedition that would ultimately change his life. The Inspire International Antarctica Expedition with Sir Robert Swan, who was the first person to walk both the North and South Poles. He found a new purpose, and from then on, he committed his life to climate studies at the world's highest peaks and in the world's coldest regions. So as you can imagine, this would require him to begin training as a mountaineer. By 2022, Anurag had climbed over 10 peaks and passes and had been to over 60 countries across all 7 continents. And at every single summit he reached, he would talk with the people around him about the mountain communities that depend on these ecosystems. However, despite all of this experience, both in the mountains and professionally, he still hadn't climbed any of the 8,000ers. The 14 mountains whose peaks cross above 8,000 meters. And of course, some of these include K2 or Makalu, and who could forget probably the most famous one, Mount Everest, the highest mountain in the entire world. And so in 2023, Anurag decided that he would start his quest to conquer all 14 of these peaks, and the first one he would take on would be Annapurna. And listen, I'm no mountaineer, but I still think it's a little crazy that he chose Annapurna as his first choice for these peaks, because let's just say that this particular mountain has earned a nickname, the Killer Mountain. Oh, and it's earned it for good reason. From my understanding, even Mount Everest is like a cakewalk compared to Annapurna, and Anurag was about to learn this the hard way. Now, I would never stand a chance to climb a mountain nicknamed the Killer Mountain, but if I were to try, well, you can guarantee that I would be drinking Element the entire way. Element is this video's sponsor, and they are the best and most creative electrolyte company out there. Take this, for example. You guys have probably heard me talk about Element for like years now, and that's because it's been a legit part of my routine for so long. But lately, I've been especially into Element Sparkling, and what makes it different is that it doesn't just feel like another version of the packets. Although, man, I do really love these packets, and I'll actually get to that in just a second. Element Sparkling is so refreshing, and it's actually perfect now that spring is coming and it's starting to warm up outside. A few months ago, I cracked one of these open. It's lemonade salt while I was playing pickleball on like a hot day, and like, dude, replacing your electrolytes and drinking something so refreshing at the same time, like, I still think about that moment. That was like the most refreshing sip of any drink I've ever had. But Element Sparkling is also built for those like in-between moments of life, you know, not just the big efforts like me playing pickleball, not just after a brutal hike even, but the regular parts of the day when you're working or driving, you know, all that stuff. It's a slim 12-ounce can, and it's cold, it's crisp, it's carbonated, and it makes staying on top of hydration just so much easier. Each can has 500 milligrams of sodium, 100 milligrams of potassium, and 30 milligrams of magnesium. And so it's not just sparkling water, it's a real electrolyte drink in a format that's way easier to work into your everyday life. And so what I would do right now is go to drinkelement.com/KyleHatesHiking. That's drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click the link at the top of the description and go purchase some lemonade salt Element Sparkling, this stuff right here. And when you do that through my link, you're gonna get a sample pack of 8 additional Element sticks thrown in with your order for no extra cost. And trust me, these are awesome as well. And so one more time, drinklmnt.com/KyleHatesHiking, or click the link and go get yourself some free Elements. And okay, buckle up, because this story is about to get very dark. Nepal's Annapurna sits at 26,545 feet in elevation, or about 8,091 meters. And even though it's only the 10th highest peak in the world, Annapurna has the highest fatality rate of all the 8,000ers. Almost 1 in 3 climbers who attempt Annapurna don't make it back. 1 in 3. Compare that to Mount Everest, for instance, whose fatality rate is around 1 to 2%, or even K2, the second highest mountain in the world, whose death rate is closer to 25%. So you can see that Annapurna is on a whole nother level, basically. And there are 3 reasons for this. And the first is the avalanche danger. Annapurna's south face is notorious for these massive, unpredictable avalanches. The route between Camp 2 and Camp 3 is swept by avalanches like constantly. And so climbers try to move through this section as fast as they can because, I mean, it's basically a shooting gallery. Annapurna also gets hit with sudden, violent storms that can trap climbers high up on the mountain. The weather can turn from clear skies all the way to whiteout conditions in just minutes, and with pretty much zero warning. And on top of all the environmental risks, the mountain makes climbers perform some of the most technically difficult maneuvers that exist in the sport, right? There are these giant seracs that hang over climbers' heads. There's deep crevasses that appear out of nowhere, and narrow ridges that require perfect balance. That is, unless you don't mind falling to your death. During the weekend that Anurag would attempt his summit, Annapurna would claim another victim, and that was Noel Hanna, a 56-year-old Irish climber who had summited Everest 10 times in the past. He died in his tent at Camp 4 after successfully summiting without supplemental oxygen, which just goes to show that no one is safe on Annapurna unless you're, back at base camp, which happens to be where Anurag found himself in late March of 2023. Now, here's something important. Anurag decided to attempt Annapurna without supplemental oxygen, just like the previous, now deceased climber that I mentioned a second ago. And this is a huge deal. Climbing above 8,000 meters without oxygen is incredibly rare and incredibly dangerous. Once you're up there, your brain starts losing oxygen at a rapid pace. Your organs start shutting down. I mean, spending over 12 hours in the death zone without supplemental oxygen, well, that means that you're essentially tempting fate. If you get stuck up there for any longer than that, you can you can pretty much forget it. On the night of April 15th, 2023, Anurag and his Sherpa Dawa started their summit push. They made relatively good time climbing up the mountain with weather patterns holding out for the most part. They left Camp 4 in the middle of the night, heading for the summit right as the clock struck midnight now on April 16th. But as they climbed higher, Anurag started feeling sick. The beginning signs of altitude sickness were starting to kick in. Fatigue, a terrible cough that he had been nursing for a few days was getting worse by the second. Every breath felt just so heavy. Every step was agony. And around Camp 5, which was still well below the summit, by the way, Anurag radioed down telling his team that he was not going to summit. He had made his choice. He was going to turn around. And the team radioed back telling him that the weather was turning very bad anyways. And so Anurag and his Sherpa, they made this very smart decision and they started going back down the mountain. And I have to note that in most of the mountaineering stories that I cover on this channel, we hear about someone ignoring their better judgment or not paying attention to early warning signs of trouble and, continuing up the mountain when they should have turned around. But none of that was true in Anurag's story. He and his Sherpa made the kind of decision that usually saves lives on mountains like Everest, K2, and of course, Annapurna. And so how is it possible then that just a few moments later, everyone thought that Anurag was dead? You heard that right. By now, it was April 17th, 2023. Right around 2:30 p.m., Anurag and his Sherpa were descending between Camp 3 and Camp 2, and despite now being out of the death zone, just out of it, they were now approaching the most dangerous section of the climb, or the descent, a steep, icy couloir with crevasses and seracs looming above. Now, just 2 weeks earlier, a major avalanche had swept through this exact area, and luckily, no one was buried at the time, but everyone knew that this section was a death trap, a ticking time bomb, if you will, and it was even more perilous going down than it was going up. Oh, and plus, the weather was getting worse and worse. Visibility was becoming a problem. Just because they had turned around did not mean that they were anywhere close to safety yet. Now, descending at the same time as Anurag, a Brazilian climber who had also turned back before reaching the summit. He was now in front of Anurag, moving very, very carefully. Moez was the more experienced climber, and Anurag once again made a very smart decision to let him go first. They reached a section that required a short rappel about 25 feet down a steep, icy wall. There was a snow anchor there with 2 ropes hanging from it, one for people and one for gear, right? The one for the people had a giant knot at the bottom of it, to stop people from rappelling any further past that point. And so Moez went first, thinking that he would kind of show Anurag the ropes. Literally. He clipped into the rope that had the knot at the end, and he rappelled down safely, stopping at that giant knot. Then it was Anurag's turn. He clipped in, and he started rappelling, but unlike Moez, Anurag didn't see a knot at the bottom of his rope, because it turns out he had grabbed the wrong rope. He was on the cargo rope used for hauling gear and equipment, not the one used for rappelling people. It was too short, and again, it had no knot at the end. Absolutely nothing to stop all the momentum he was picking up as he rappelled down. And so he began gaining more and more speed, which, if you're rappelling down an icy slope, well, that's not exactly what you want. And eventually, Anurag dropped right off the rope, hitting the hard ice below and then sliding down and down. Moez and Dawa Sherpa watched in horror as he just tumbled uncontrollably down the steep, icy slope, picking up even more speed, unable to self-arrest, until after several hundred feet of sliding, he disappeared into a massive crevasse. Moez and Dawa Sherpa hustled to the mouth of the crevasse, and they started shouting down to him. And they didn't hear anything back. The weather was getting worse. The avalanche danger was increasing by the second. And so Moez and the Sherpa basically had to keep moving or risk dying themselves. And that sounds harsh, but again, they were shouting to him and he wasn't responding. I mean, every logical sign was telling them that Anurag was gone. And so they left him behind. And again, that sounds cruel, but you have to really think here, what else could they have done? I mean, this is the harsh truth of mountaineering. when something goes wrong on one of the world's most dangerous mountains, it's essentially everyone for themselves. If you expend valuable time and energy and resources on an unplanned rescue, it's very likely that you too will end up dying. And so they did what mountaineering forces you to do in these situations, and they would have to live with that. When Moez and Dawa Sherpa reached Camp 2, they radioed all the way down to base camp, basically saying that Anurag had fallen into a crevasse and, well, we think he's dead. And for those of you that have never fallen into a crevasse, let me tell you what it's like. Or at least what it's like from what I've researched. I haven't either. A crevasse is a deep crack in a glacier with walls made of solid ice. The bottom is often filled with snow and debris from previous avalanches. And when you fall into one, which is basically like my worst nightmare, by the way, the impact is most likely going to kill you. But if you're lucky or perhaps unlucky enough to survive, then you're most likely going to break bones, experience extreme trauma and internal bleeding and external bleeding, and then you're going to die. But if you survive the fall and somehow you're still conscious, well, you're faced with a brand new nightmare, which is you're trapped. Like, how are you going to get out? That was the reality that Anurag faced when he came to moments after he was left behind. He didn't die. He awoke in the crevasse after being unconscious for quite some time and immediately recognized the situation that he had quite literally landed in. He began assessing the walls surrounding him, and they were way too slippery and icy for him to climb out of. And then he assessed his injuries. Now, he was hurt, obviously, but he wasn't hurt like critically. His best chances were to stay put and then just pray that rescue would come, which sounds like a simple plan, but of course, when you're stuck down there, that is way easier said than done. He didn't have much in terms of rations. He didn't have a radio. He barely had anything, but he did have a GoPro. We'll come back to that. And even though the crevasse was slightly warmer than like the outside face of the mountain, since it was protected from the wind, well, it was still well below freezing, which meant that hypothermia and frostbite were not just a possibility, but pretty much inevitable at some point. Anurag knew that he would be in for the fight of his life, essentially. Most people who fall into crevasses and don't die right away will still die within hours. All that Anurag could do was just try to outlast the mountain, which almost always is a losing proposition. Meanwhile, back in India, Anurag's family was in hell. His brothers, Ashish Maloo and Sudhir Maloo, well, they got the call on April 17th. It was assumed that their brother was dead, though the Maloo family did hold on to a sliver of hope because there had been no official confirmation yet, which is great and all, but I do want to stress that this was just a sliver, right? Everyone on the mountain was already privately mourning the loss of Anurag. Initial search efforts were being crushed by the continued terrible weather. Helicopters couldn't fly anywhere near the area where he fell, and ground teams couldn't even safely approach the area because of the avalanche risk. After 24 hours, pretty much everyone had given up hope. However, back in India, there were two people that refused to accept this reality. And that, of course, was Anurag's brothers. Ashish would end up launching an online petition on change.org, desperately urging the Nepalese and Indian governments to continue the search and continue trying to rescue their brother. The petition read, quote, "We know that Anurag is out there somewhere waiting for us. Help us find him by signing and sharing this petition." And that's super admirable. But the reality is that the brothers didn't actually know if he was alive or dead at this point. All they knew is that there was a chance he was still alive, and no matter how small that chance was, it was worth fighting for. What the brothers couldn't have known at this time was that, well, their hunch was right. Anurag was not only alive, but he was actually conscious. And that's when he pressed record for the first time on his GoPro.
Hello! Really praying and hoping someone would come and rescue me.
Anurag would continue recording videos for his family, videos that, to my knowledge, have never surfaced publicly. But we know that in these videos, he was telling his family he loved them, that he would miss them, and he was just praying that someone would rescue him somehow. He was lying on his right side in like a fetal position, the body's natural response to extreme cold. his body was trying to conserve heat and essentially keep his core organs alive. The crevasse did protect him from the wind, which was good. And don't get me wrong, it was still well below freezing in that crevasse, but all this meant was that Anurag wouldn't freeze to death quickly. It would still happen, but it would happen a lot slower. However, there were two more things that Anurag had going for him. First of all, his location. Not the crevasse part, that was obviously not a benefit, but rather the altitude. Like I said earlier, he wasn't in the death zone anymore. He was actually about 2,000 meters lower, and remember, he didn't bring any supplemental oxygen with him. If he had fallen even just like 1,000 meters higher, he would have passed out from the lack of oxygen within just a few hours and almost certainly would have died within the first 24 hours. You also have to remember that Anurag was in peak physical condition from all of the months of training he had put in. His body could last way longer than just like your average person. And so as the situation got more extreme, his body would respond kind of in the way that like a wild animal would. His body temperature would drop, his metabolism slowed, and his heart rate slowly decreased. He was experiencing hypothermia, and weirdly, this put his body into sort of like a hibernation mode. Hypothermia is not good, but what was happening did kind of protect his organs by requiring less oxygen. All of that stuff basically prolonged his life in that crevasse by a couple days, but that was pretty much it. I mean, humans aren't built to hibernate after all, and so with each passing hour, his odds of survival dramatically decreased. And even if he was somehow able to survive, it was almost guaranteed that he would be like seriously and permanently injured, right? On the third day of being stuck in the crevasse, Anurag's GoPro battery died. Not that he was really in any shape to make videos at this point. He was exhausted, he was starving, dehydrated, and shortly after his GoPro lost battery, well, so did Anurag's brain. He fully lost consciousness, and fresh snow falling into the crevasse started to bury his body. This blanket of snow all but sealed his fate, and again, this is the reality of Annapurna. It's nicknamed the Killer Mountain, but in this case, it wasn't just going to kill Anurag, it was going to erase him entirely. However, there was one factor that Annapurna wasn't accounting for, and that was the petition on change.org. His brothers had made that petition out of pure desperation, almost like this probably won't work, but what do we really have to lose? But what they didn't expect was that thousands of people would sign it, and not just like everyday random people or like Facebook moms, but like very powerful people who even had governmental connections. Even the CEO of Apple. You have to remember that Anurag was not a thrill seeker. He built his life around helping people, and now people really wanted to help him. Within a day of Anurag's disappearance, the Indian government got word of the petition and became involved, helping the Nepalese government authorize and organize a rescue operation. Seven Summits Treks, the expedition company who took Anurag up the mountain, would be coordinating rescue efforts from base camp. However, this is way easier on paper than it actually is in reality. They needed specialists to assist with this rescue. They needed expert climbers who knew how to perform a crevasse rescue at high altitude in an active avalanche zone. And this was a talent pool that was very few and far between. And plus, whoever they ended up getting had to be available during the peak climbing season. But pretty quickly, things started to come together, and then fate had one more card to play, and it came in the form of one name, Adam Bialeski. And let me tell you about this dude. Adam Bialeski is a Polish mountaineer, and he's known for being one of the best high-altitude climbers in the entire world. He's summited multiple 8,000 meter peaks. He's done first ascents up routes that had never been climbed before. He's even climbed some of these mountains in the winter when the conditions are at their most brutal. And he's also a rescuer with experience saving lives on mountains like K2, climbing through blizzards to rescue people in complete darkness. And luckily, guess who happened to be at Annapurna base camp already when all this was going down? That's right, Adam, as well as his climbing partner, Mariusz Hatala, well, they were already there, hoping to attempt a new route on the mountain's northwest face, and for weeks, they had just been kind of waiting for the perfect weather window to do this. They waited so long that by April 19th, 2023, they were among the very few climbers that were even left at base camp. And so they were kind of just waiting around and resting when all of a sudden the founder of Seven Summit Treks unzipped their tent and started pleading with them to help with Anurag's rescue, or perhaps his body recovery. And Adam and Mariusz did not hesitate. There was a chance that Anurag was still alive after all, and even just that small chance was enough to convince them to leap into action. And so on the early morning of April 20th, the rescue team assembled at base camp, led by Adam and Mariusz with the help of several Sherpas and a helicopter pilot. They had one mission, and that was to retrieve Anurag, dead or alive. But even with the best talent in the world at something like this, the rescue was a lot easier said than done. Crevasse rescues at high altitude are extremely rare, and they're obviously extremely dangerous. Most climbing teams don't have the technical expertise to pull them off, and also add in the fact that they're doing this in an active avalanche zone. Well, the truth is that most rescuers wouldn't even attempt this, especially given how unlikely it was that Anurag was still alive. I mean, most rescuers would just assume that they're recovering a body at this point, and so, why not wait until the weather and the conditions are much safer? However, again, Anurag's family was convinced that he could still be alive up there, and so that put a sense of urgency into all of these rescuers. They flew from base camp up to Camp 2 in helicopters, and then from that point, the helicopter could only carry 1 or 2 people at a time because of the altitude. Finding landing spots in these conditions was nearly impossible. The pilot would barely touch the ground and then yell, "Jump out," and the climbers would kind of just leap onto the slope. Ultimately, it took about 3 flights to even just get everyone up there. From the helicopter landing zone, it took about 20 to 30 minutes of careful and highly technical climbing to reach the crevasse. Remember, this was the most dangerous and difficult area of the route. Steep ice, loose snow, falling rocks. And in case you forgot, which you probably haven't, I've said it 7 times now, this whole section is an extremely active avalanche zone. But miraculously, they all safely reach the mouth of the crevasse, and that's when reality set in. They kind of looked down into it, and maybe they had underestimated how deep the crack went, but at this point, they were now realizing that it was over 250 feet deep. They're straining their eyes, looking down as far as they can, and then they finally made out what looked like a dark yellow shape covered in white snow. And of course, they knew that this was Anurag's body. They called down to him, hoping to hear something in response, something to indicate he was still alive down there, but they did not hear anything back. Anurag was now unconscious, and no sounds that they could make, no yelling down to him, none of that was going to be enough to have him come to. And so, understandably, the rescuers probably assumed that it was too late. I mean, losing consciousness while stuck in a crevasse on one of the world's most dangerous mountains, that's probably one of the surest signs that you're done for, right? But still, they had come all this way, and Mariusz instructed the Sherpa team to set up a complex rope system, a pulley contraption with multiple anchors and safety lines. Adam and a Sherpa prepared to rappel down, and they were prepared for body recovery, essentially meaning they were going to be hauling up dead weight, as bad as that sounds. Adam clipped into the rope and then slowly started descending into the crevasse. The slick walls of the crevasse were closing in on him as the further he got, jagged ice on both sides, narrow passages. It's like claustrophobia on steroids. And so he had to maneuver carefully to avoid getting stuck himself. And of course, if his rope somehow severed, well, then he was almost certainly done for. After what felt like hours, but was most likely only a couple minutes, Adam reached the bottom of the crevasse. They were far from celebrating yet, because there, at the bottom, was Anurag Maloo lying on his right side in a fetal position. There's no other way to say it. It looked like a corpse. There was no body movement whatsoever. He was also buried in snow because, it had been days since he had had the strength to even uncover the snow off of himself. None of this indicates that he was going to be alive. So Adam approached Anurag's body, and he brushed away the snow from his face to check for breathing. But before he could even hear a breath, Adam noticed something else. Anurag's eyes reacted to the light. His body shivered. A single low, shallow breath emerged. Folks, it turns out that Anurag's brothers were right. Everyone who had signed the petition was right. Anurag Maloo somehow was alive. Adam shouted the news up to the crew, who obviously rejoiced, but any celebration had to be cut short pretty much immediately because even though he was alive, Anurag was still in bad shape. He was basically unconscious, hypothermic, and severely frostbitten. His lips had turned blue. I mean, his body was basically on the verge of shutting down for good. He was laying there on death's door, and frankly, he was about to pass right through it. There was literally no time to wait. They had to get him out of the crevasse right now. And folks, I know that this almost sounds like an action movie. I promise I'm trying not to over dramatize it. This is all true. And I know it's all true because, well, we have the footage. This is a clip, an actual clip from Adam's GoPro of the rescue. You can literally see them rappelling Anurag up the crevasse. And I don't know about you, but Anurag basically looks like, just dead weight here. However, I guess there was enough proof of life that they really believed he had a chance of surviving this. And so they used the pulley system to hoist him up, while Adam used himself as a counterweight. It took over an hour for them to slowly pull Anurag out of there. And when Adam finally reached the surface with Anurag's almost lifeless body, the team of Sherpas worked fast. They strapped Anurag into a rescue harness and they loaded him onto the helicopter, which fast-tracked him back down to base camp for a bit more prep work and then ultimately on to the hospital. Chang Dawa Sherpa, who was up there helping the entire time, would later call this a 1 in a million rescue. However, the story is not over yet because getting Anurag out of the crevasse was only step 2. He may have escaped the mountain, but it wasn't done trying to kill him yet. And as if this story wasn't already insane enough, step 3 proved to be the most hellish of all, and it started with 3 words: dead on arrival. Imagine pulling off this miraculous 1 in a million rescue just to hear those 3 words once Anurag gets to the hospital. And by the way, this wasn't just like a normal hospital. They actually ended up bringing him to a smaller hospital, like not the one in Kathmandu where, you would hope someone needing urgent medical care would go. Because Anurag was pretty much on his last breaths, they basically had no choice but to bring him to the closest hospital. And as soon as doctors took a look at him, he was declared dead on arrival. He didn't have a pulse, he wasn't breathing anymore, and his body temperature was critically low. He had severe hypothermia, frostbite all over his hands and arms and feet. He was, by all definitions, gone. And look, this would have probably been a rational ending to the story, a sad one, but it would make sense. Someone who fought against the elements and stayed alive for as long as he possibly could before eventually succumbing to injury and the bitter cold and dying. All of that heroism, from the petition to Adam's rescue, well, as honorable as that stuff was, it was going to be for nothing. But at least they tried, right? Remember, this is the Killer Mountain after all. 1 in 3 people don't make it. But Anurag's brother, Ashish, who had flown to Nepal from India, was sitting there at the hospital, and he refused to accept that his brother was now just going to be another statistic. Adam's team had pulled Anurag out from the crevasse, and he was alive back then, so surely he still had a chance of being brought back to life now. And so Ashish begged the attending physician, Dr. Asim Subaidi, to start performing CPR on Anurag. And to his credit, Dr. Subaidi agreed. And so he started CPR. He did it for an hour, and there was still no pulse. But he kept going. 2 hours, still no pulse. Let's try 3 hours. 3 hours of CPR, and still nothing. Most medical protocols say that if CPR doesn't work after like 30 to 60 minutes, then the patient is essentially gone. But Dr. Subaidi kept going. They hit 4 hours of CPR, and at this point, Dr. Subaidi basically told Anurag's family that even if he did somehow come out of this with a pulse, he would most likely be like severely impaired for the rest of his life. Maybe he would never walk again or speak again, or even have no brain function. However, Anurag's family asked to continue CPR for just 1 more hour. After this 5th hour passed, well, at that point they would call it. And I'm no doctor, but my understanding is that this is pretty unusual. Like, CPR rarely goes beyond a couple of hours, let alone 4 or 5. Dr. Subaidi was kind of risking a lot here. He was going against medical norms, exhausting his staff, and maybe most heartbreakingly, providing a lot of false hope to Anurag's family. But speaking of them, apparently a psychic had told Anurag's family that he would awake within 5 hours. And in a later interview, Dr. Subaidi said, quote, "Though I am a student of science, I believe in miracles." And so he told the family that he would give Anurag 1 more hour of CPR, but after that, it would be over for good. And somehow, 5 minutes into the 5th hour, Dr. Subaidi returned to chest compressions, and as he began, he suddenly froze. Something had changed. He felt the slightest heartbeat in Anurag's chest, and for the first time in over 4 hours of doing CPR, Anurag was starting to respond. Now, it was a very faint heartbeat, and it was very irregular, but it was a heartbeat nonetheless, which is just insane. They literally brought him back from the dead. But of course, now they had to keep him from going back and do whatever they could to bring Anurag back to normal health. He would remain in a coma for 12 days, breathing through a ventilator. But then on May 2nd, 2023, he opened his eyes. Anurag doesn't remember falling into the crevasse. He doesn't remember the 3 days that he spent inside of it. He doesn't remember being rescued. All he could say about the whole experience was, it felt like a rebirth. And of course, that statement came later because, get this, Anurag was actually voiceless for 5 months after this ordeal. And that was just the tip of the iceberg. Severe frostbite had destroyed the fingertips on his right hand, forcing doctors to have to amputate them. Large skin grafts covered much of his right side. And when he finally stood up for the first time, his legs didn't remember what standing even was. However, step by step, Anurag fought his way back until eventually he was talking and walking again. Around October of 2023, 6 months after the accident, Anurag was able to actually meet Adam Bielewski in person. Like, I guess technically they met before, but like a proper meet. And they hugged, and they cried, and they talked for hours. Today, Anurag Maloo is not only alive, but from everything I can see, he's thriving. And even though his climbing days are over, who could blame him for that, he's still finding ways to make impacts. Anurag founded the Voice of Glaciers Foundation, which is a platform focused on protecting glaciers and mountain ecosystems. He travels the world speaking at universities, corporations, and other forums. He's received all sorts of awards and accolades and recognition for the work that he's done and for his incredible story. And folks, this was never supposed to happen. Anurag was supposed to have been lost in that crevasse on Annapurna. That's what all logic would say anyways. And Anurag's perspective on the incident is actually very surprising. He said, quote, "I am very grateful that Annapurna protected me, took care of me during those 3 days, and sent me back." He also says, quote, "And I'm grateful to her for letting me experience how close life and death are." I'm going to contradict myself a little bit here. This is a miracle story, obviously, but at the same time, it goes deeper than that. It's not even the story of a man against a mountain, right? It's the story of community. Anurag was as invested a member of the global climbing community as anyone could possibly be. He had devoted his life to protecting their habitats and improving the lives of people who work on the world's highest mountains or live near them. Community is what put Anurag on the mountain, and community is what saved him when he made the error that sent him sliding into what should have been his icy coffin. Adam and Mariusz didn't hesitate to help with Anurag's rescue because that's what you do for your fellow climber, no matter what the odds are. The Sherpa team definitely did not have to enter an avalanche zone to help him, but they felt like Anurag was one of their own. And Dr. Subaidi didn't have to perform CPR for 4 hours, but he knew that he had to do everything he could before he gave up. Anurag's brothers didn't have to fight for the rescue operation, but their petition is basically what opened the door for all of these miracles to come true. This is what people do in a crisis. They act with optimism until the very last moment. Annapurna rarely gives people second chances, but Anurag is living proof that when you have a 1 in a million opportunity to be reborn, you do something with it. And so if you're inspired by any of Anurag's story, I would really appreciate it if you left some love for him in the comments section below, and I will see all of you in the next video. Oh, and speaking of that next video, actually, YouTube seems to think you'll enjoy this video next, and so give it a click, and I appreciate all of you so much. I have the best subscribers on YouTube, and it's not even close.